acceptance center for the Holocaust, LGBT, genocide. And it would look at City Hall if we could make this a permanent, where the dress would be permanent. That's my vision. We all have to have a dream.
I like that vision.
And I love
Really
this
talking about-
space. So you could see this is a document of a work document. Thank God they have the work document, otherwise they would have been exterminated.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most important case to me. And this is something I've always wanted to share with you. My mom, 2 days before going in the concentration camp,
This photo.
her gym teacher was Freddie Hirsch. Freddie Hirsch was gay. So what? He was in love. And yet he was her teacher. And you could see how he worked with people. And in the concentration camp,
You wore the triangle. Huh?
you could see what happened to people that were gay. And to think that if you love somebody or you've met somebody, this shouldn't be a crime. Or to believe that you're Jewish or Catholic or Christian, it doesn't matter. You need to be honored because of who you are and what you've been through. This is going to sound crazy. I can't tell you how many tears I have cried because of who you are and what you've gone through, and you gave me a vote to create this. This is huge, Steve.
I'm happy that I did my part, but
You
it
did.
really,
You did.
really.
You're
was
ready to
amazing.
take these off and sit down?
I am ready.
Schluckles in die Tatzen, wer wird Tatzen mich schatzen? Oi, oi, Gott ist größer, hat doch gewünscht mein Häuser, die wir sind gegeben, die wir sind ausgegeben, die wir sind ausgegeben.
I hope I don't
Starker Freunde, ich die Morgen.
because I'm with Steve Padilla, our councilman, and somebody who went through something so traumatic, and it's real what you went through. Steve Padilla had COVID. Before we get into it, I just want you to know how grateful I am that you're here.
Thank you for that.
And I want you to know, and I want everybody to know, that we're the South Bay Historical Society and the Chula Vista Heritage Museum inside Ruth. And you and all of City Council unanimously voted so that we have this Holocaust exhibit. I can never thank you enough except to keep going. So, by me keeping going, I need to hear about you. I want to know who you are, where you were born, your drive, and then I want to talk about COVID.
A lot happening today. Thank you first and foremost for all that you do in our community, all you've brought, your heart and your passion and your determination to help establish this part of our community exhibit about really linking not just our local stories, but linking it to the bigger world and the bigger things that we're facing. So thank you for all that you do, and for all the good wishes and sweet things that you sent my way when I was ill and convalescing. So I want to thank you for that, and thank so many people in our community, because
There's
they
the camera.
came
Say
out of
thank
the
you.
woodwork, you know, and I'll be forever grateful
They
for
did,
all
didn't
that
they?
love. Yeah,
I
it was
wasn't the
amazing. It
only
was
one.
overwhelming.
Poor Tony, your assistant, I bet you he was running around all over going,
Tony's one of the guys that I'm grateful for, and who I don't really tell him and tell you how often, and often enough, how much I love and appreciate you, Tony. You're amazing. I'm very lucky to have him, by the way.
yeah, for sure.
But
Where were you born?
you know, I'm a native San Diego guy. My parents, by way of background, my biological father's family came from Nayarit in Mexico, and also from Ensenada. Very working class background. My mother's family came from the Azore Islands of Portugal, St. Michael, San Miguel. They're what we call Asturiana. And so they immigrated to Boston at the turn of the 20th century. And my grandmother was 4 years old on a steamship called the Coptic that was actually built by the White Star Line, the same line that built the Titanic. She came through, into Boston and settled there in Massachusetts. So I have family all over New England. But my mother's lost her father suddenly when she was very young, and my grandmother remarried to someone who was serving in the Navy and ended up first in Idaho and then in San Diego. And so my parents met in middle school in National City and were high school sweethearts at Sweetwater High School.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and the late 1960s.
Amazing.
And that's how they met, yeah.
Brothers, sisters?
I'm the oldest of four. My dad, when he was very young, right out of high school, and a bunch of his friends enlisted in the Marine Corps. This is in 1966, at the height of the Vietnam conflict. And, they all went, not all of them came back. My dad did. He was a blue-collar worker. He worked for a company that used to be called Pacific Telephone before the big bells were broken up.
Sure.
And he was a communications worker. He was a linesman. He put up a lot of telephone lines all over Chula Vista and South Bay and Bonita. And then he was killed in an automobile accident when I was barely 5 years old. And my mom was 7 months pregnant with my youngest brother.
No.
So my mother was widowed very young with two small children and one on the way. And so my youngest brother never really met his biological dad. And but my dad had great benefits and great insurance. That is how my mom bought a home in Eastern Chula Vista in 1972, which was pre-805. The only housing and only thing in the eastern part of Chula Vista at that time was the community college, Bonita Vista Middle School, high school, and the housing across from the college. And it was very controversial then, apparently, because it was considered, leapfrog development. Because Chula Vista basically stopped at Hilltop Drive. Right where that, and there was nothing but canyons east of that, except when you went out to College Estates. So I came here and put down roots when I was barely 5, and grew up here and went to local schools, and that's where I kind of skinned my knees and grew up. So I've seen this community change a lot over the years.
Do you have any memories of your father?
Oh yes, many. I have very vivid memories of my dad, and I have, and they're good memories, and I have very vivid memories to this day of the night that he died, and the night that we left that little apartment in National City and never came back. We stayed with my grandmother for 6 months, who also had lived in National City for many years, had a home, and then 6 months later my mom bought the house in Chula Vista where I grew up. But I was very blessed and very lucky in that 4 years later she remarried to my stepdad, who has never been a step. He is an amazing man that proved that fatherhood is about a lot more than biology, and raised us. He and my mom had a daughter of their own, who's my youngest sister.
Nice.
And, my dad still lives out in the house in College Estates where I grew up. We lost my mom unexpectedly,
I'm so sorry.
with whom I was very close in 1997, to lung cancer, and she never smoked a day in her life. And
was she around smoke at all?
She was around smoke for a period of time, and that was a very tough experience for our family. I can't believe it's been over 20 years now, but it's just my dad, and he's still there, and my siblings are all in the region locally. So,
can you imagine somebody watching this episode and they see this and they go, maybe today I'm going to quit smoking, not for me, but for the person that has to breathe it. If one person can make that difference
and save a life,
then our show did something. And we're finding this more and more and more with our history here in Chula Vista, and being able to hear stories, real stories. You graduated from high school, Bonita?
I did. How'd you guess?
Because you're right there in the neighborhood.
Well, Barron, go Barons for all the Barons out there. And I went early in my life. I went into law enforcement in my early 20s. I went to the academy right out of high school. I did that before I went to college and before I went to law school, and I did it backwards and the hard way. But that's what middle class folks do. I didn't have a trust fund or a lot of money where I could just go to school and do nothing else. I would have loved to have, but
Sure.
I did that and
Wow.
got involved in local politics very early. Greg Cox was the mayor in 1989,
And his father was my teacher,
wow,
Gordon.
wow, see, small world.
You too, Harry? Yeah.
And he appointed me to the Board of Ethics. Well, actually, the presiding judge at the local municipal court recommended me, and they sort of rubber stamped it back then.
Wow.
So I served on the Board of Ethics and then on the Safety Commission I was appointed by the council, and this was in like 1989 and 1990, and I served on a number of task force. So I got involved in local boards and commissions and got involved in some partisan politics, working on some state senate and even a presidential campaign. But I got involved in public policy early and being involved in the political realm and in the community very early in life.
You care.
And always, I grew up with it around the dinner table.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were raised to be aware of what was going on in the world and in the community around us.
Did you get the feeling that if you didn't know and something didn't work in the way that you wanted it to, it was your fault because you should have known about it?
I tried never to internalize, and more to just learn and grow. Like all of it, missed opportunities or, they're all valuable, even with your triumphs and successes, but as long as you
Everything
take
is
some
a
meaning,
lesson.
everything is a lesson.
Yeah.
And I think if you can remember that, you're well on your way, because all of us are imperfect. And all of us will make mistakes along the way in our lives. And the real question is, at least for me, are we growing? Are we learning? Are we being our better selves, every day? And I think that's really what it's all about for me.
I'm just amazed and in shock still of what you've been through. You've been through something that I'm going to have a really hard time understanding it, and that is the choice, being able to have a choice. And especially with what happened last year and how people were trying to not be nice when we're supposed to be nice and work together. And I loved your graciousness of how you were able to handle situations. You really showed me so much, Steve. And yet I thought to myself, this isn't fair, because I come from a mother who's a Holocaust survivor. You shouldn't be feeling the feelings of the Holocaust, of somebody trying to put you down for what you believe in and what is in you. Am I correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the fundamental failures of our human experience, right? There seems to be in some people an innate ignorance and fear of what they don't understand, and they often react to that with anger and hatred and all kinds of discriminatory feelings. I'm assuming that you're talking about the whole controversy with the drag queen story time last year and the hate groups that came to town.
But more than that, I'm concerned and have my love for you as a person, because story time is going to come and go, but nobody should be hurting you. If somebody came to me and said to me, you can't do this because you're Jewish, or you get this Jewish thrown at me all the time, or the Holocaust didn't exist, I'm sorry, but I'm on the freeway when it comes to making sure that everybody is treated with dignity And if somebody doesn't like something, then don't go.
You know, I
I saw people attempting to almost physically beat you up
oh yeah, when I was mayor,
in city council, at our meetings, and I was appalled.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, no, that's not supposed to happen here, and it's not supposed to happen now.
we would all hope, but we are reminded, I think, that bigotry and homophobia and racism and jingoistic sort of xenophobic attitudes are real and prevalent and alive in our communities. And it's heartbreaking to have to confront that reality, but it's also a call to action, to give our voices and our actions to speak out. Particularly today, when we see inequity, inequality, when we see prejudice, racism, homophobia, we have, all of us, an obligation to speak up. Mm-hmm. Because there's an old saying, to sin by silence makes cowards of all men, in terms of men, in the terms of humanity, not in the gender respect. Mm-hmm. And when we cower away from conflict or controversy or something that's uncomfortable, when we see people being essentially attacked or persecuted and we remain silent, we become part of that oppression. And so I know what it's like. Now, obviously, I've had a tough time, in terms of my own story as being an out gay person and coming out in a very public way when I was the sitting mayor of the city. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't met exactly with universal love and acceptance either. And in fact, it was met with political calculation. I was challenged, to be frank, for mayor of Chula Vista by the wife of a popular former mayor whose family name had been in politics for years, and who ran in large part on the political calculation that would rely upon the homophobia of people in the community. I have a shot at running against this guy and taking him out of office because I know that he told a lot of people in Chula Vista that he's gay, and therefore he just lost a lot of votes. And so here's my opportunity. And it took me a long time to be able to say this out loud, but when you're in politics and you run for office and you use as part of your strategic advantage the hate and intolerance and homophobia of others, then you're being homophobic because it's wrong. And suddenly, overnight, everything I had done was under a microscope. Whether I did something good or made a mistake, they were exponentially exaggerated into huge issues. And if I were a straight married guy with a woman and 2 kids and a dog and a cat and a white picket fence, none of that stuff would have ever been an issue. But it was a campaign that was undertaken because they saw a weakened mayor who told the truth about himself. And unfortunately, there were people in this community who fell for that and went right after it. And I was defeated for re-election. So it wasn't just a political defeat, it was a personal rejection because I felt it in the community, a community where I grew up and had given my whole adult life to serving and trying to make better. I would literally have the proverbial soccer mom, I'll never forget at that time, with the grocery cart and her young kids would see me coming down the aisle in the grocery store when the height of this was all popping up, and would turn the other way and shield her children, get the kids away from this man. He's a threat because he's a homosexual. And to have that done in your own hometown where you have grown up, that hurts a lot. So for me, that was a very challenging time personally, but it was also a time of tremendous growth. And so fast forward to very recently when we had the mostly out of town, hate groups come to Chula Vista.
Out of town.
It tore that wound open again.
Of town.
Yeah. They drove a long way.
They drove a long way.
A lot of them, yeah. But there were some people still in this community who went right along with it and showed up every week in council and had placards with my picture on it. But I was very blessed and lucky in that many, and I think a majority in our community, stood up and spoke out, including yourself and many others who said, no, this is not who we are. We're not going to use this as an opportunity to attack an entire community. And we're not doing
finish the sentence. We are not going to tolerate this. Not tolerate it. We're not going to accept it. I hate the word tolerate, just so you know. We're not going to accept this.
Or should we?
Because this happened 75 years ago to people that were Jewish, people that had a political belief, people that were gay. They were all marked in a different colored triangle, whatever. And my mom fought at the age of 14, 15, 16, and watched people come and watched people go. And not only that, but how did I find out about the Holocaust? Because my mom was screaming in the middle of the night one day when I was 8 years old or 7 years old, and she thought that she was back in Auschwitz. So it's still in you. And we have a park here. It's called Freedom Park. That's what it should be, a place where you can walk and be and do what you need to do and know that you can wave to people. And I'm not gay. I'm happily married, Jewish, but you should be able to say, I am gay, I'm Christian, Catholic, whatever the religion is, I don't know, and feel proud.
Well, we all have value as human beings. We're all amazing creatures, whether you believe that's of the universe or of children of God. We all have value, and we're all precious in that way, and we have to treat each other that way, with that care and that respect. And
but I learned my lessons from a Holocaust survivor.
And you said, and I have, and I'm very much aware that while I've had my own difficulties, nothing like what your mother and families experienced. But the Holocaust is a reminder to us about what extremes those kinds of sentiments can be taken to.
That's correct. Extremes.
And that's why you have to nip it in the bud early. That's why you have to speak out. When you hear someone being bigoted, being homophobic, being whatever, you have to stand up and speak out and say, oh, no. That isn't appropriate, that isn't right, that isn't human. And call it out for what it is. And when people sit quietly and watch that stuff and not say a word, they are assenting to it.
My mom would be 91, 92. If she was sitting in this chair right now, you know what she'd say to you? Well, Steve. She'd call you Steve, if that's okay.
Of course.
She'd say, Steve, do you know that my granddaughter married another woman? And she's happy.
Amen.
She's happy. She doesn't, as my mother would say back then, it wasn't where you said, I'm gay, but that you found somebody you were in love with. You met somebody. This is huge. And it's, again, are we going to tolerate it? No, we accept it.
That's right.
It's in us. My question, are people still trying to hurt you?
Well, it was a fun experience when I was mayor. I had, the gamut. I had people that were wonderfully supportive and communicated that, and I had the crazies. I mean, I had the death threats, and I had the nuts, and I had one guy show up in my lobby at the time with a gun and a cereal box.
Oh, please.
And he was wondering, what my schedule was. I had security. I needed to have security at the time. They made fun of me for that. They made a big political brouhaha about the fact that I had a security detail when I was during executing my official duties as mayor after having received threats. And can you imagine today, after the world of terrorism we live in, the hate that's out there now, what happens to people walking down this? Can you imagine making a political issue out of the public safety of a public official and their life? But back then it was used against me as a weapon. And people laughed and made fun of me and thought it was really funny. I don't know that the safety of a public figure who's been threatened is ever something funny.
No.
But it was certainly made so. I think part of it was just some people in the community were just stuck in another time. They just had a very small small town mindset, and they didn't quite understand what was going on.
The air filter needs to be changed.
The air filter needed to be changed. They didn't understand that if the city knew I had received threats as the mayor, and they didn't provide protection for me, and something happened to me, this town would probably be named after my daughter, probably right now. And that would affect everybody's pocketbook. So I think a lot of people didn't quite get that. But, they thought it was funny and they thought it was something to make fun of. But you know what? Those experiences weren't fun. They were painful. But I'm so grateful to God and to the universe because here I am. I'm healthy. These folks, some of the folks thought that they had extinguished my political career. They were gleeful about it. They had hoped to extinguish even more than that. And here I sit. And I was elected back to the city council as an openly gay candidate and was elected overwhelmingly by voters in our community. So that tells you that things change, that communities grow, they learn, they become aware, and we're living in a very different time now. And but we still have it. We still have people out there who, as that old people say in the social media universe, haters gonna hate, and we have to confront that when we can with love and compassion, and it's hard.
Yes.
It's hard to do that sometimes, and we have to confront it with enlightenment. We have to turn the light on in the dark spaces, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why educating folks about the connection to the Holocaust and what that means in our broader humanity. We see it again percolating in the world right now, in Eastern Europe, in other parts of Europe. We see the rise of hard-right political parties that utilize scapegoating and diminishing of people and of cultures and of races again. We see that percolating again around the world. We see it happening in South America. We see it, unfortunately, some of our leaders here in our own country, acting like that they have a fetish for strong men. This is dangerous stuff. And we have to just speak out. We have to stand up and speak out. It's very important.
I see you in City Hall. I stand before you. I write a book. I see the way that this book honored the Holocaust survivors. I saw you basically run from behind to join us in a photo. It was like, don't stop. Don't stop. So we figure out, okay, we'll do a documentary. I get asked to do a TED Talk. And now we're in the only Holocaust exhibit south of LA. Not San Diego, but south of LA. And you stand here or sit as somebody who was your past was persecuted because of what you believed. And my past was persecuted because of what I believed. And it's a voice. This is not entertaining. This is education.
That's right.
And this is huge. And all of a sudden, COVID. Hello, COVID. Right? We had 67 days. And I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm talking to Harry, I'm talking to people in our society and everything that we've built. And then it's just like, wake up, Sandy. People are dying. Then I look at the paper. Steve Padilla has COVID. What the heck happens when you have COVID? We need to know, because it got a little politically discombobulated, if I can use that word, or as we say in Hebrew, vermished. But this happened to you, Steve. What happened?
I got very sick. And thankfully, most of the folks who do get exposed to coronavirus or even develop COVID, which is the syndrome suite of symptoms that...
When you came down with COVID, I kind of vowed that when I lived in Las Vegas and I worked at the freak show at Cirque, where I sewed...
I love it.
that I was taking a break. I was busy with this exhibit, And all I could get were texts, sew masks, sew masks. And it was like, Tony, you don't know me, but I'm a weird stranger. And we have to get masks to the family. We have to get them so that I want them all the same. Now I'll make you anything you want. But the bottom line is I wanted them the same so that you would recognize. I was so afraid that if the mask was going to be different and you didn't recognize, I wanted them just for that because the safety meant the most important thing to me. And every time I made a mask, I was praying to God, and I said to myself, anybody who has one of my masks, they better make it. I'm not going to let anything happen to them. I didn't know what I was doing. Fabric stores were closed. I was freaked out trying to figure out what am I going to do. Mark, did those jeans fit? Great. Wash them and do something with them. Mm-hmm. Get clean t-shirts, figure out how to do the backings, and just make this work. Even if it's for one person. And all I could think about was Steve Padilla. Steve Padilla. You have to know how people love you, prayed for you. You were like the Superman that woke people up. You didn't say, oh, I think I have corona, I have a cough and a headache. You were in a hospital. You're hanging on for your life. Something is doing this for you. After 11 days, Steve, what happened?
It was a journey. First, I mean, when you're intubated and on a ventilator, they heavily sedate you. They basically put you in a medically induced coma.
What do you think about? You don't think.
And some crazy. You don't.
You do and you don't.
You do and you don't. What they do is the protocol is they sort of bring you out of it periodically a little bit because they don't want to keep you completely. Because if they do that consistently over a lengthy period of time, it can cause some permanent long-term damage. So I do have some interesting recollections and awareness because I was heavily sedated, but I would come up and be aware enough to where I could see my surroundings and I could see people. But when you're heavily sedated and you're kind of semi-conscious and you're taking in your surroundings, the brain kind of fills in the blanks for you that you don't understand. So I had some really crazy kind of hallucinations. So I thought that I was seeing and witnessing and hearing some things that really weren't real, but were sort of laughable when I look back on it. But, for example, many of my very distinct memories of that, both when I was still on the ventilator and right after I got extubated, I was convinced I had been moved a number of times and that I had been in different rooms. And I could even describe all the different rooms for you and how they were different. But guess what? I was in the same room the whole time. I never left the same room in the ICU, but I could have swore to you I was in different rooms. So yeah, you are on some pretty heavy duty stuff.
No family can see you. Nothing. You're there just hanging on.
But it was emotional and deeply reflective for me, as it is. It sounds cliche, but when you are in that situation where you confront your mortality and the very real possibility that you just might not wake up, and you realize that you've come out of that, it's deeply emotional, at least it was for me. I remember the night that they told me they were moving me back to the regular hospital floor, which really wasn't a regular floor, it was a floor for COVID patients, right? So it was still pretty intense. But they were going to move me out of the intensive care unit. And I was very relieved, happy that was happening. And I remember them telling me, how hospitals are, for folks who've ever unfortunately been hospitalized, they tell you, okay, someone's going to come for you in just a little bit and move you down to the regular ward. But of course, a little bit in hospital world is like hours later. So I'm laying there in my bed with all this stuff hooked up to me, and I'm watching this giant flat screen in my room in front of me, and I'm watching the news. And two stories that just really popped at me at that moment. One was a reporting about a surgeon in New York City who died in his husband's arms because he went to work. He went to work extra shifts to help with the hospitals that were being overwhelmed with patients. He contracted coronavirus and did not survive, much younger than me, and literally died in his husband's arms, okay? Then there was the second story, and I remember these vividly. It was high school sweethearts from New Jersey. He was a vice principal of a Catholic school, Catholic high school. Taught, coached softball and football and soccer. They had young kids. And she played their wedding song to him over FaceTime as he died. And I remember just laying there in my bed watching this story and becoming increasingly aware of where I was and why and what was happening with me. And I just laid there and wept, just for hours. I just laid there and wept all night until they finally moved me. Hours later, they came and got me and moved me.
Were you in pain? Did you feel pain anywhere? Did you have muscle?
What happens when you're intubated is everything that your body normally does, physiologically, chemically, biologically, is all done artificially for you in many cases, because you can't just get out of bed and go places to take care of nature or to clean yourself or do anything else. So I had a feeding tube. I had multiple, I even had an arterial catheter in my artery in my neck. I had multiple IVs in each arm. And I pretty much, any part of my body was plugged into something. I had a million things hooked into me. And they would prone me every evening, which you read about in the press, where they put you on your stomach because that helps allow the lungs to better process oxygen. But what they don't tell you is, for a patient in ICU who's intubated and hooked up to all this equipment, it is a couple hour long process, and it takes about 6 people to come in. Now remember, not just 6 people in a regular hospital where the nurses and doctors can just walk in your room. You're in an isolation glass room. They have to, before they go into the room with you, they have to put on all this gear and PPE and like they're going to the moon. Then they come in your room, and then once they're in the room with you, it takes 6 people just to turn you over. And it takes about an hour to flip you over, because it's a very involved, delicate process, because in moving you, they could cause things to happen. And so they were doing this with me every night. They were playing my favorite music, apparently, for me, because they called my daughter and asked her what my favorite music was, and they were rocking out with me in the ICU playing my
Which is what? What's your favorite music?
Oh, I'm a classic rock guy, rhythm and blues, type of guy. A lot of
Might
that,
as well
some jazz.
jump.
And they were playing it, and apparently, and it has an impact. It was very therapeutic,
Sure.
but there was discomfort. I lost 30 pounds in about 2 weeks. I had most of the muscle mass in my legs kind of wasted away. So when I was finally out of intubation and recovering, I really couldn't walk or stand up much. In fact, when I first was discharged in early April, I stayed with my daughter and son-in-law for 6 weeks because I couldn't be alone. And I literally, the day that I got home, my son-in-law, who's a big strapping guy, literally had to hold me up and walk me. And I had a walker, which I hated, and I tried not to use, psychological thing. But I couldn't walk, really. And if I were to walk from here to you, a couple of steps when I first got home, I would have to sit and catch my breath, because it really does some damage to the lungs and the breathing capacity.
Do you have any repercussions now?
I'm very lucky. It's almost about 100% everything. I have some scarring in the lung that's permanent, but they don't think that it will impede my full pulmonary capacity. And the cardio stuff looks good. Everything else looks good. I have some tingling in my legs, numbness, because when you're horizontal for that long, you lay on some nerves. And so there was nerve damage from that. That will take many months to come back finally. But, to think that I couldn't walk 2 steps without completely being out of breath. And now I'm getting back to the gym, and I go on 3-4 mile walks around the golf course, and, I've come a long way since then. Very lucky.
Unreal.
Yeah. Puts it all in perspective, that's for sure.
Mr. Councilman, fabulous, wonderful, incredible Steve Padilla.
Yeah.
May I give you a standing ovation?
Oh, you're sweet.
Harry,
Give you
can
one
you get your
too.
mask on?
Thank you.
Stay there. Harry. My co-host, Harry Orgavon.
Bravo, bravo, bravo. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been an honor. And it's always fun.
Unreal. We're not done yet.
We're not?
Have a seat.
Oh, okay. We're doing next? All right. All right.
And with that, we say, see you later. Now we end it.
All right. You did-
Schluckleisner in die Tatzen, wer wird Tatzen mich schatzen? Oi, oi, Gott ist größer, hat doch gewünscht mein Häuser, die mir sind gegeben, Häuser, wir sind ausgegeben, die wir sind ausgegeben.